But very good morning to all of you attending. I think we are expecting, close to 100 participants today. So can everybody hear me okay? If you can hear me, if you don't mind, just click the raise hand icon. Okay, thank you. And if for whatever reason the video cuts out or the audio cuts out, just leave the webinar and then rejoin. It should fix itself. All right, I'm just going to give it maybe another minute or so. We've got quite a bit to cover. I'd like to get finished in about 45 minutes so that we can take as many questions as we can. Now, just a couple of things. You'll see a couple of buttons on your Zoom software. Because this is a webinar, you can't message me directly. So while I'm doing the webinar, if you can use the Q&A tab to ask any questions, and one of my colleagues on the panel will try their best to answer you while I get it all done. All right. All right. I think we're gonna have to get started. We've got quite a bit to go through. My panelists are telling me 45 minutes might be a bit ambitious. So let's get started, all right? So today we're going to talk about the Australian versus Canadian migration and how both of them work. They're actually very similar. And I'll try and explain. Well, the webinar is set up so that I'm trying to explain both at the same time. You'll see during the slides. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming, but I have tried to simplify it as best I can, all right? So thanks for joining me today. My name is William, and I'm a registered migration agent with Austral Migration Consultancy. You can check out my license number. It's on screen, and you can check me out online as well. This is the content we're going to go through today. So approximately 45 minutes. I'm going to go through a little bit about us, like the different visa types, how the process works, and so on, and try and get through it as quickly and as clearly as I can. A little bit about Austral first. So Austral Migration Consultancy, we're an immigration law firm. I'm right now recording this webinar in Singapore. My panelists, colleagues are in our other offices in Malaysia. We've got offices in Malaysia, Singapore, and a small office in Australia as well. Internally, we have 2 immigration lawyers. I myself am a migration agent. We have dedicated processing teams. We process specifically for migration purposes. We don't practice any other parts of law. Currently, we focus only on Australia and Canada, which is why we're going through this webinar today. We've got some of our certifications on screen, which you can, by all means, go and check out. If you haven't been to our website, I do encourage you to go there. We're going to keep adding stuff, good content to our website. I mean, this is an old screenshot, but a lot of the articles on our website have like hundreds of comments. We try and answer as many questions as we can on our website. You can go and have a look. You can also have a look at our YouTube channel, where I'll probably upload this replay onto our YouTube channel, so you can have a look there. You just go to YouTube and search for Austral Migration Consultancy. Right now, what you're seeing on screen is some of our video testimonials from some of our past clients. We've also got some videos about how the Australian migration program works, investor visas, business visas, and so on. And like I said, again, I'll probably try and upload this there as well. So what we're going to do before we get into too many details is kind of answer the question, why are Australia and Canada the top migration destinations in the world? Don't quote me on that. I don't know if it's exactly the right numbers, but based on what we've seen, based on the demand in Southeast Asia, these two have the highest volumes of immigration in the last, I'd say, couple of decades. It varies from year to year, but they're actually very similar. And that's probably why they're the 2 most popular migrant countries when you do a quick research about them. The reason for that is you can see some of the pictures on screen, but you have things like subsidized education or free education. Ironically, in Canada and Australia, they both refer to their public healthcare system as Medicare. So it's free public healthcare. It's called Medicare in both countries. They have a good balance of work versus life, so good work-life balance. Currencies in both countries are pretty much the same. They're pretty strong. Not just that, they have some of the top 10 highest minimum wages in the world. I think Australia is number 1 or number 2, and Canada's somewhere in the top 10 as well. Primarily good public transport, cheap cars, houses, and then the other things like the cities are some of the most livable cities in the world. So like Vancouver and your Melbournes and Perth and Adelaide and so on. They're very popular places for people to go visit in general, and also to live. So these are kind of the primary reasons that most of our clients tell us were the reasons that push them to go, besides other factors like, oh, they studied there or they have relatives there, those kind of reasons. But these are the kind of top reasons. Now, as a resident of either country, it's kind of the same. You have all of these benefits: the right to work, right to live anywhere you're allowed to. So that's quite important. The different visas allow you to live in different parts of either country. Buying, renting property, you have the rights to do all this. Kids can go to school, private insurance, and then access to Medicare. So everything we talk about today will give you access to the public healthcare system, which is called Medicare. So both countries allow you to do this as residents. Yeah. Now, obviously, there are quite a few visas available for either country. You've got investor visas, business visas, partner visas, return visas, and so on. But today we're going to focus on the skilled migration programs specifically, and the occupation-based pathways, meaning that it's through your occupation, your job, what you do as an employee, rather than owning a business or an investor. If you are interested in any of the other ones I mentioned, business, investor, resident return partner visas, we do all those. It's just today we're not going to cover it. So reach out to us, messages, and one of our colleagues will get back to you and go through that in more detail. Now, the skill migration program for both countries is extremely popular. Australia has been more popular over the last few decades versus Canada, but Canada in the more recent years has seen quite a spike in people migrating to the country. So this is 2018-2019 migration program year for Australia. It's just kind of showing you the breakdown of the different source countries. Source countries meaning source country by nationality, not source country by where they physically are. So here in Singapore, it won't say, oh, Singapore is sending 3,000 people who are of Indian nationality and 2,000 of Chinese nationality. It's not going to show that. It's actually from where you are originally from. Overall, Australia's ceiling for the skill migration program, I think this year and next financial year, it's set at 160,000 people. And in earlier years, it peaked at about 190,000 people. So it kind of varies between 120 to 190,000 people per year. So that's for Australia. So for Canada, now these numbers were what they were targeting for the 2019 to 2021 immigration levels. This was their plan. They wanted to bring in across these years about 300 to 400,000 people per year. However, having said that, you can see it's broken down into different subsectors, subcategories, right? So you can see like 100,000 of each of that 400,000 is family reunification. So it's not really relevant to you guys who are tuned in today. What's more relevant to you, if you can see, it says federal, economic, provincial, and territorial nominees. So that's pretty much the same as Australia's skilled program. So they're looking at between 150 to 180,000 skilled migrants each year. So you can see both countries approximately the same, and Canada is slowly peaking upwards as they go on because they're quite hungry for growth, right? So very similar for both countries. If you've never seen a map of Canada, and I think quite a few people may not have, this is what it looks like. These are the different provinces. So in Canada, it's called provinces. In Australia, it's called states. So the country is made up of different states. In Canada, they refer to the states as provinces. And this is kind of a map to show you the breakdown of the movement of migrants in. This is the 2017 migration year. Yeah, it's broken down into like, you can see that they've got like refugees, economic, and family. Again, the previous slide, it's broken down into different subcategories. So yours is the one that you guys is more relevant to you guys, is the economic movement in for both countries. Now, primarily for both countries, there are two pathways. There is a direct pathway and there's a sponsored pathway. So direct, and just to give you a reason why is that both Canada and Australia have federal and state governments. So federal government is like the higher level government, and then state governments are the individual states or provinces. Yeah. So there's a direct, which is to the federal government, and is sponsored to the state government. And there is a difference on how each of those works, which I'll kind of explain to you after this. So have a look at this. If you've done any research, you probably would have seen this. Australia and Canada run different direct and state applications, which you can see here. Right? Australia refers to them as visa numbers, so visa subclasses 189, 190, and 491. And Canada doesn't have any numbers, which you can see here. They have just the express entry and the provincial nomination programs, right? Now, I'm just having a look to see if you guys have any questions. All right. So again, if you have any questions, please just use the Q&A tab, and my colleagues Jason or Frank will be able to answer there. So please go ahead and do that so that we can kind of run through those questions near the end. And again, if you have any problems with the audio or the video, please just log out and then log back in, all right? And I forgot to ask this, we do like to usually ask this. Has anybody studied in Canada or Australia? If so, would you mind raising your hands? We kind of like to get a gauge on what our audience where our audience has lived over the years. Okay, I'm seeing quite a few hands put up, which is good. It means you have an idea of what it's like to live there, or that you've lived there in the past. Now, just to give you an insight, Australia and Canada's programs, in terms of Australia, the migration program from like early 2000s when I was studying there until now is fundamentally very similar, meaning that it hasn't really changed much since then. Canada's one has changed over the years, but they've now become very similar, which, going back to what you see on screen, they've got now two pathways, direct and state-sponsored, yeah? So I can see some people are messaging saying that, you know, you've studied there and you have degrees there. So if you have any specific questions on those things, please use the Q&A tab and one of my colleagues will get back to you. All right, so knowing that there are two pathways, direct and state, what are the basic requirements? Now, just keep in mind that I'm trying to give all the basic requirements for both countries at the same time. They're actually very, very similar. Slight differences in each, but in general, this is what they're looking at. So the four main items are occupation and demand, your age, a points test, and English ability, okay? Now, go through one at a time, and you kind of understand what the difference is. The very first thing is in occupation. You have to have an occupation in demand. And both countries run what are called occupation in demand lists. Australia runs 3 lists. They're called the MLT SSL, the STSOL, and the ROL. You can come to our website and have a look. All the 3 lists are there. And Canada runs the NOC list, which is called the National Occupation Classification List. Australia's list is about 400 plus occupations. Canada's list is, I think it's in the thousands, okay? But both countries have occupation lists, so your occupation has to be on that list. If you aren't sure exactly which occupation you fit into, at the end of this webinar, you'll be sent to a registration link for a one-on-one consultation. I do encourage you to fill that in. One of my colleagues will be in touch. They'll kind of ask you questions on what you do on a day-to-day basis, and from that information, they can kind of tell you which occupation suits you best, right? So that's the first thing, occupation in demand. You need to really know this. You can't say, oh, well, I have this occupation and I did a bit of this and I did a bit of that. When you apply for migration to Australia or Canada, you have to apply specifically for one one occupation, okay? You can't really jump to multiple, although you can use multiple for points purposes, which is a bit more complicated and something we're not going to touch on today. But that's the very first thing, occupation. The second thing is age. Now, Australia has a hard limit meaning once you hit 45, you can't apply unless it's for something like the Global Talent Visa, which I'll touch on a little bit later on, but the Global Talent Visa's age limit is 55 years old. But for the Skilled Migration Program in general, for most people, the hard limit of 45. Now, for Canada, it's not a hard limit. It says, you know, for Canada, as you age, you lose points. So each age bracket you go into, you get less points. And when you have too few points, you wouldn't be able to qualify anyway. So like, for example, it says that 47 years old and above is 0 points for your age. So does that mean you can't apply? And the answer is no, well, not exactly. If you have other points in the other sectors, you might have enough, but it's a rare case because you'd have to have studied or worked in Canada as an example. So in general, 45 years is kind of the limit for both countries in a practical sense. Points test, both countries run a points system. Australia's point system is used for both minimum criteria and selection. So what that means is that you need to have 65 points as a minimum. So you calculate points based on your age, your work experience, and so on. And from that, you have to have 65 points and above to be legally allowed to apply. So that's why I've put as a minimum. But they also use those points for selection. So, you know, let's say I have like 75 points. So 75 points, yes, I've gone above the minimum, and they use the 75 points to kind of calculate my chances. You know, like when they look into the pool, they'll select people based on points. So Australia uses the same points for both minimum and selection. Canada uses two different points tests, right? The first one, which is called the Federal Skilled Workers Program, which is Canada has quite a few programs, but realistically, you'd be applying for one of these programs, which is the Federal Skilled Workers Program and the Provincial Nomination Program. Now, the Federal Skilled Workers Program, it gives you points based on your age, academic qualifications, and so on. And you need to have 67 points and above to be allowed to apply. But the 67 points is what they use for minimum criteria, meaning that they calculate, okay, 67 points, okay, X points for your age, X points for your academic history, and so on. You have 67 points and above, then say, okay, you're allowed to apply. So that's the minimum criteria. Now that you have the minimum criteria, they will recalculate your points based on something called the Comprehensive Ranking System, or CSR. And that has a maximum score of 1,200 points. And your points test for the second stage, which is the CSR, is calculated differently. So instead of giving you like X amount of points for your age, they'll give you Y. So it'll give you slightly different. Exactly why they've done this, I can't really say, but don't worry about it. If you're not too sure how to calculate, again, one of my colleagues can reach out and calculate it for you. There's a maximum of 1,200 points. Most people can claim up to 500 points if they're outside of Australia, outside of Canada. And they've never studied there. For those who've studied in Canada or worked in Canada in the past, you do get some extra points. Now, if you've studied in Canada or Australia or worked in Canada or worked in Australia, I do encourage you to reach out because just messages, because you have quite a few more points and potential pathways than other people might have. So that's based on the points test, right? Lastly, English criteria. The minimum criteria for both countries is what I refer to as competent English. Competent English, if you've ever taken an English test like IELTS, as an example, competent English is band 6 across all 4 components. IELTS has reading, writing, listening, and speaking as its components, and English competency or a competent level English is band 6 in each. The main difference between the two countries is the level of acceptance of English tests. If you look at the screen, you can see that Australia recognizes quite a few more English tests. So you can see I've put IELTS both. So that means IELTS Academic and IELTS General, PTE, which is the Pearson Test of English, OET, TOEFL, and then there's another one called, can't remember what the other one is called, but they accept quite a few, right? But the main ones would be IELTS, PTE, and probably OET for Australia. Canada, on the other hand, only recognizes 2. And realistically, you can only choose one because they recognize IELTS General, and then a test called the CELPIP, which is it's like a Canadian test of English. And most countries would be able to give you the IELTS General test, and not as many countries can give you the Canadian English test, right? So that's the only main difference. Both countries are looking at for competent level English and above. Obviously, the higher you score, the better your point score is. But Canada accepts IELTS General only, right? So those are the base criteria. If you don't hit one of the base criteria, you wouldn't be allowed to apply in general. So just something to keep in mind. Now, the migration process kind of looks like this. I've tried to kind of combine both. So I've used a color key. Australia is going to be in yellow. Canada is in green. So anything that is highlighted in yellow is what Australia refers to, or Australia is looking more closely for, and then in green is for Canada. So you can see there's 5 stages, and each stage has to be done one before the next. You can't skip any stages. And once you've gone through all the stages, your visa is granted. Yeah. So we're going to go through each of the stages. You can see stage 1, occupation or academic assessment. So for Australia, it's primarily an occupation assessment. And for Canada, it's primarily an academic assessment. In the pool of applicants, you can see stage 2, which is expression of interest for Australia, and express entry submission for Canada. Stage 3 is a state application for Australia, a provincial application for Canada, and then finally, invitation to apply and visa grant. They're the same for both countries, right? We'll go through each one as quickly as I can. So stage 1, occupation or academic assessment. Now, what's happening here is that you're looking to prove your job and your academic qualifications. On Australia's side, it's more focused on it's kind of focused on both, but the priority is proving your occupation. For Canada, the priority in a way is proving your academic qualifications, because you need your academic qualifications to be verified for on Canada's side to be allowed to apply. In Australia's case, it's leaning a little bit more towards the occupation, because the occupation has a higher weightage when you apply for Australia. Yeah. So you can see on the screen, there's a couple of things that typically they collect. You're looking at, like university transcripts, certificates, reference letters to prove your work experience, pay slips, tax statements, and so on. So basically, you're collecting evidence to prove your academic qualifications and your occupation, regardless of which country you're applying for. And both countries will use private or government bodies called assessing authorities. And the job of these assessing authorities is to take these documents that you provide them and kind of assess them and then come back with a result. On Australia's side, they'll come back saying, okay, you are occupation A or occupation B. And for Canada's side, they'll say, your academic qualifications are the equivalent of a Canadian qualification, and therefore you can claim for that qualification, and then you claim the work experience separately, right? So both at this stage, essentially what you're trying to do is prove, number 1, what occupation you work in, and number 2, that your qualifications are the equivalent level of an Australian or Canadian qualification. So degree is degree, diploma, diploma, master's, masters, and so on, right? Stage 1 varies. Canada's one is a little bit faster, about 2 months. Australia's one is typically around 2 to 3 months on average to come back with a result. Yeah. So that's stage 1, occupation assessment. You can't get through to the pool of applicants or onwards until you get this stage done. So it's very important. Stage number 2 is called an expression of interest or express entry submission. So what does that mean? That means you're doing an official submission to the federal government that you'd like to apply for migration for both countries. Before you get into this stage, you have to take your English test. So if I jump back a bit here, between stages 1 and 2, you have to do your English test. Now for stage 1, you don't necessarily have to have your English test ready to start. So a lot of our clients start first, prepare all those documents, and then take the English test. But it needs to be done before stage number 2. So when you're in stage number 2, what's happening? You're claiming all of your points. So you're saying, here's how many points I have for my age. Here's how many points I have for my work experience, my spouse's work experience, and so on. So depending on which country you're applying to, you claim different levels of points. So for example, Australia, typically it's weighted towards the main applicant. So let's say I'm applying with my wife. If I'm applying with my wife, it's weighted towards me. Most of it is what I can claim. And my wife could claim, my wife can contribute to my score, primarily English test or an occupation assessment, but primarily it's just the English. For Canada's side, it's weighted heavily towards the main applicant. Let's say it's myself, but my spouse can contribute points for her English experience, her English score, work experience, and academic history. And then things like, do you have a sibling in Canada and so on. So slightly different for both, but it is a very similar process. Essentially, you're claiming what you can legally claim and no more. And when you submit an expression of interest or an express entry submission, you get a timestamp, so it kind of knows when you started this application. Both submissions have validity dates. Yeah. So I have to clarify, at this stage, technically you're not applying for a visa yet. You're just telling both governments I'd like to apply for a visa, meaning you're not paying visa fees and all that, which I'll go through later on at this stage. You're just telling the governments I'd like to apply, and then the government goes into the pool of applicants and they can select you. So at this stage, if you qualify to apply directly, now not everybody does on Australia's side, but everybody can on Canada's side, they can actually select you at this stage already. But realistically, most people are applying for state or provincial nomination, especially in this period during COVID, where the migration programs have slowed down a little bit. It is quite advantageous to have a state involved, because each of the states has their own agenda. Each of the states or provinces of Canada and Australia, they're looking for growth, and they're looking for growth in different occupation categories or different industry categories and so on, right? And so the states can push your application over the line, right? So the states, they're not open all the time. In theory, the states are open all the time, but they run, typically they run occupation lists. So each of the states or provinces of Australia and Canada has this occupation list. And you can only apply if your occupation is on that list. And so some states will say, okay, look, you go into the expression of interest or express entry pool and you wait there, and I can select you. And I'll select you if I want to. So a state will come in and they'll select you. Other states will say, okay, do you have these criteria? Are you on this? Do you have this occupation? If so, you can apply to my state, and I'll consider whether I want to select you. So that's the thing. Different states have very different requirements. Our job as a migration firm is to know which states are open for which occupations for our clients. When can we apply? How to apply? And so on, right? Now, depending on which country you're applying for, there's bonus points if you get selected by a state, which is why we feel it's quite advantageous, especially if you feel your point score is a little bit on the low side. You can consider using a state to sponsor you. So you can see on screen the points there. Australia, you get either 5 or 15 points, depending on which visa you're applying for, and on top of whatever score you already have. And for Canada's one, you have 600 points. For Canada's one, the provincial sponsorship program is pretty significant. If they give you 600 points, that you're pretty much selected, because for the provincial nomination program, they're typically selecting people at like 700-ish points, like 750 points. The first 150 points you probably get from your age, academic qualifications, work history, and English test. You probably have 100 something points already, you know? And so with a provincial nomination given to you, you'll have 600 points. So you'll be at like 700, 800 points out of 1200, and you're pretty much selected at that point, right? So yeah, state provincial nomination and application is very important to pretty much all of our clients who are in process right now. And it's something you should strongly consider. A lot of people think I'm only going to apply for subclass 189, which is for Australia, or I'm only going to apply for the express entry program and nothing else. Well, you can. It really depends on your specific profile, but in most cases, it is beneficial to consider applying for both a direct application and a state-sponsored or provincial-sponsored application, right? Again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A tab. Be very happy to, my colleagues will be very happy to answer whatever you ask there. Now, once you've gotten through those first 3 stages, you receive an invitation to apply. Invitation to apply happens regardless of which country. It's called invitation to apply. At this point, I'd say 90% is too low. It's probably like 95 to 99% certain your visa is granted. Nothing is ever guaranteed, but the reason I say it's like 95, 99% is because at this stage, one thing a lot of people ask me is that, you know, can they decide not to grant my visa because of where I'm from, where I live, what I do? And the answer is no. Both countries run very objective visa application programs. So they say, look, you have a points test, occupation, and so on. So if you are invited, all they're checking for is things that can fail an application. And the only things that can fail an application at this point, number 1, medical, if you fail medical, police, number 2, police clearance, and number 3, that you've claimed false points which you weren't allowed to claim, or you provided false documents, right? Now, false documents, obviously that doesn't happen often. And yes, I'd say, yes, some people are trying to game the system, and they will find out. Claiming the wrong points one, it happens quite often for those who do this themselves. They say, oh, look, I thought I could claim 90 points for Australia, or I thought I could claim 490 points for Canada. Then in reality, they couldn't claim anywhere near that. But you can still receive the invitation because it's a computerized system, right? So there's computerized system in most cases, and then there's usually a case officer who will look through. But they don't look through that your points claimed are real. They look through that they want to select based on whatever criteria you've input. Then they'll say, okay, you claimed 490 points for the express entry program. I'd like to see your work experience, academic qualifications, English test, and so on. And then if you say, well, actually, I haven't got those yet, or I'm missing this. Firstly, they will only come back to you after you pay. So they say, look, I invite you to apply. If you'd like to accept your invitation, you have to pay these fees. And you go, okay, that's fine, I'll pay the fees. And when you pay the fees, then your documents are finalized. They'll look through and then they'll start processing it. And at this point, if you've made a mistake, it's too late. Your fees are not going to be refunded. And well, in Australia's case, and also in Canada's case, you have to be wary of them barring you from reapplying for X amount of years. So it's pretty serious. So the invitation to apply stage is very important. You're pretty much near the final. This is the final stage of the application process. Prove everything you have. Police clearances for anywhere you've lived for more than 12 months in the last 10 years, and medical checkups as well. Everything is done here. And then finally, your visa is granted. Now, for both countries, you have about 12 months to enter. About 12 months. It's sometimes it's slightly less, depends on a couple of factors, but typically it's about 12 months. Australia's case, you just enter and you can leave. So you can enter anywhere and then you can leave. Canada's case, you can enter anywhere, but you have to apply for your PR card and then you can leave after that. I think your PR card, you can get it sent to a local address, like a friend's address, relative's address, or forwarder. But you have to get a PR card before you leave, right? So your visa grant, depending on which country and depending on which visa you're applying for, you have a grace period to get over to Australia or Canada permanently. So this first entry, it really is what it sounds like. It's a first entry. You can go back, you can fly in and then do whatever you need to, and then you can leave. But ultimately, you do have to make permanent moves to Australia or Canada. In Australia's case, if you've applied for permanent residency, you have a maximum of 5 years to make your permanent move. If you've applied for provisional residency, we didn't have time to go through what the difference between permanent or provisional residency, but I do encourage you to sign up for a consultation. We'll run you through exactly what those two mean. If you apply for provisional residency, which is for regional parts of Australia, you have a maximum of 2 years grace period to move over. And for Canada, you have a maximum of 3 years, typically 3 years grace period to move over permanently. You can stretch that if you get there within the 5-year period, and then obviously you start working, then you can apply for renewal with that information. Yeah. So visa grant, very similar for both. You get a visa grant letter. It's tagged to your passport, and then ultimately for Canada, you get a PR card. Australia doesn't have a PR card. It's tagged to your passport. Yeah. So those are the 5 stages of the visa process. The most, the most popular question we get is like, how much does this cost? Now, the visa fees vary depending on country and depending on assessing authority, which meaning it depends on your occupation as well. So have a look here. Left side is Australia, right side is Canada. So on Australia's side, each of the applicants, so let's say it's me, I'm the main applicant, there's a fee for me. For my spouse or anybody above the age of 18 in my application, there's a fee. And then for kids, there's a fee. There's a fee for the state, if you're using a state, and there's a fee for the assessing authorities, English tests, health and police clearances. So English test, English test, health and police clearances for both are approximately the same. Assessing authority for Australia is a little bit higher. Assessing authority for Canada is a little bit lower. The government fees from Canada, they're quite a bit lower. So you can see on the right side, you can see like the main applicant for Canada is 1,325. Secondary applicant is 1,325, which is the spouse, and each child is only $225. Whereas Australia on the other side is a little bit higher, right? So Canada is the program fees are slightly less, but they charge you for the different things. You can see on the right side, the state application could be up to $1,500, and it could be less depending on which state you choose. So $1,500 is for Ontario, and then smaller states, different states charge slightly different fees, right? Besides this, I'd say if you need to get translations done, other than that, pretty much everything is covered on screen. So these are an approximate visa fees. The fees can go up over time. For Australia's side, it goes up once every 2 years, Canada as well. Now, behind the scenes of a migration agency or what we do, a lot of people ask, where does a migration agency or migration firm come in? And primarily, it's really about understanding the process, because ultimately this is a legal process. So understanding the law. What you see on screen is a screenshot of Australian migration law. It's more complicated than you think. A lot of forums, a lot of Facebook groups, they make it sound like, oh, it's super simple, everybody can do it. Now, the reality is most people do apply online by themselves, but what's happened in the more recent years is that a lot of people are, they're guided by these forums and Facebook groups, and they're starting to make a lot of mistakes in their applications, claiming more points than they could, or in worst case, is claiming less points than they actually can apply for. So I had a client who applied for Australia. He had applied by himself. He was in the pool for like 2 years, and he came to us slightly before the last lockdown, which was last year. And I told him, you actually didn't claim your points correctly. You could have claimed more points than this. So we took over his application in in August of that year, recalculated, redid his points in September. And I think by November he was selected. And then by like February, his visa was granted. So from like 2 years in the pool with like nothing happening to like 4 months and now he's in Perth. So, you know, there's two ways to do it. Some people claim way too many. Way too many is worse because they can select you when you claim too many points, and then when they find out you claimed too many points, they're not going to give you your money back, and they'll probably bar you from applying again. Now, on the flip side, if you claim too few points, that doesn't work. Doesn't help your case either. Now, the states and the provinces of Australia and Canada, they run different ways of telling you which occupation is open, which occupation is closed. It's really hard for most people to keep track of all this because every state, every province runs their own program independently. And it's up to them how they tell people about the changes. It's all public information, but it is done on a day-by-day basis. So today it could say no for 132.111 on the left, and tomorrow it could say yes. And we have to be aware of that change, right? So we monitor these things daily. Other agencies we've noticed, you have to be careful. There are a lot of agencies here who are not registered to do Australian migration and say they can. And you see things like this, you know, like they pass Word documents back and forth. And it's really not how to do it. You shouldn't be passing files through zip files and email and Google Drive links. It really shouldn't be done like that. What we do is we've invested heavily into migration specific software. So the first one you see here is for Australia. It keeps your application on track, version tracked. So we know this is version 7 of a file instead of version 3. And it does help us keep all our tasks organized and also connects to all of the government systems. This is Australia. This is Canada. Same thing, does exactly the same thing, but both systems look slightly different. It's collecting the correct information, accurate information, and ultimately helps us lodge your applications. We collect details from you via online portals, not Word documents, Excel files, all this kind of stuff. It should be done. Technology is an advantage that everybody should take advantage of. And as a digital first migration firm, that's what we do. We collect everything digitally. There's no physical documents unless absolutely necessary. Everything is scanned and validated online. Yeah. The next most popular question I get is why apply now? Why even now during this COVID period? Are the countries even accepting people? Are they processing and so on? And the answer is, if you look at Canada's migration planning levels, they're still trying to stick to this. They really are. You would have heard news of, Canada selected like 25,000 people in January. And you got to take some of these numbers with a little bit of pinch of salt. 25,000 people were primarily people within Canada, but it gives a good indication that they are serious about keeping the migration levels as consistent to their planning levels as they need to. So last year, because of lockdowns and COVID, not much happened in either country, but we are seeing a little bit of movement this year as we are slowly, it's hard to say coming out of this, but Australia and Canada have handled the COVID situation relatively well. Australia is kind of isolated itself from the virus, whereas Canada is vaccinated pretty much. They're kind of vaccinating almost everybody. So both countries are kind of looking at the programs and trying to keep it open. You have to understand that both programs are revenue items on the respective budgets, meaning that Australia and Canada count new migrants as part of how much money the country makes. So they can't just shut down, and they hire tens of thousands of people across multiple government sectors, assessing authorities to process these documents. With student visas, tourist visas, and all these kind of things kind of on pause right now until the borders come back, you have a lot of staff there which they risk of having to lay off if they don't continue processing visas. And you can see this is a recent-ish screenshot. I think this is in March. So we've got visas still being processed across the board in Australia. We've got visas. We've had visa grants this week itself. Subclass 491, which if you're familiar with it, we had one of those granted yesterday. So all of the stages are still in process, which I can show you here on the COVID-19 implications. The COVID-19 implications, A lot of people tie in border restrictions with visa processing. It's not exactly correct. The borders are closed in most cases, yes, but the visas are still being processed in most cases. So the ones that are mostly on hold would be like student visas, temporary work visas, and tourist visas in general across all both countries. Obviously, if you go to either country, there's quarantine, but that's happening across the world. But the visa processing stages still have to function. The assessing authorities, stage number one, they're big businesses, they're multi-million-dollar industries. You can't shut them down because they hire so many people. All the assessing authorities have been working and processing documents since the COVID lockdowns happened last year. They didn't stop. They may have worked from home, but they didn't stop. Visas are still being granted, which I showed you earlier. I've had visa grants this week, last week, basically throughout the last couple of months, we had multiple visas granted per month, right? So all of that is still happening. So don't confuse the border restriction and the visa processing. They're separate. Yes, in some cases, just because they give you the visa doesn't mean that the border has opened for you to go there. But you don't have to go there immediately. Like I said earlier, you have grace period. You have up to 1 year to make your first entry. And in both countries' cases, if they give you residency, permanent residency, you're exempted from the border controls anyway. So for example, I'm a permanent resident of Australia. If I wanted to fly back now, yeah, I could. The border restrictions, the border controls are not valid for me. And Canada's the same. If you're a returning permanent resident, they'll definitely let you in. So yeah, don't get those two mixed up. Visas are still being processed. Before I get to the questions, I'd like to just touch base on this visa type here. I didn't cover it earlier. Specifically for Australia, it's called the Global Talent Visa. It is good, first of all, if you're above 45 and below 55, yeah, this is one potential option for you. It is a streamlined pathway for highly skilled professionals and is a fast-tracked permanent residency application. There's no skills assessment, there's no English test required. In most cases, it is processed within 12 months. Now, the Global Talent Visa is what it sounds like. It is looking for talented individuals. So they're looking at specific industries. They're looking at 15,000 slots are available this year for Australia. Australia's financial year ends on June the 30th. But based on what I read in the budget, this number is unchanged for next year as well. I'm still looking into that, but I think it's unchanged. So 15,000 slots for this year, and then it'll reset on July the 1st. So there'll be 15,000 slots for next year as well. What they're looking for are people in these sectors. So, you can see it's technology, infrastructure, defense, manufacturing, sustainability, and so on. So if you work in one of these industries and you think, okay, my profile is pretty big. I've done some pretty big jobs. I've done some pretty big projects. I've won awards or anything like along those lines. Or if you're an academic, you've done some pretty significant research. Reach out to us. Once you go to the next link, I think you can select a time slot. Interesting program. It's a good option for those who don't qualify for the points tested program in general. And it's also a good option for those who do qualify, but they feel that they can do this as well. So what we usually do is we apply for this program at the same time as the skill migration program. Yeah, so we're pretty much at the end. I'd like to encourage you, if you haven't already spoken to one of our consultants, I couldn't go through calculating a points test with you here. I couldn't go through how to find your occupation or which visa type suits you best because it's just too much to cover in this one webinar. But reach out to us after this. A free consultation is available to you. We do not have many slots. I think most of my colleagues today are completely packed out, booked for like 7-8 hours today. But we can book you in on a weekday. We're very happy to do that. Pretty much everyone's working from home anyway, right? Including myself. So in this consultation, we go through, exactly what point score you have, and we can do both Canada and Australia if you'd like us to. So we'll tell you, okay, your score for the Australian Skilled Migration Program is this. Your score for the Federal Skilled Workers Program is this. And your score for the CSR is this. We'll go through how the process works, the timeline. Importantly, what documents are going to be required. Documents vary from occupation to occupation and country to country. So it's kind of good for us to go through exactly which sets of documents you're probably going to need. And then we'll go through a breakdown of every fee involved for your application and how that fee is broken down over, let's say, an 18 to 24 month period, just so you see, because it is broken down, it's stage by stage. It's not necessarily in one giant lump sum, all right? So book a consult today. After this webinar ends, or if you leave this webinar, you will be sent to this link. You can fill in time slot. Please use the same email that we contacted you at to book in your slot. All right. So I think roughly 45 minutes, so I'm good on time. So yeah, we're going to get through some questions.